All right, we're live. Hello, everybody, and we're going to get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining this very interesting webinar. It's going to be our third webinar here in the main line, but we're expanding and working with different people in Greater Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania and eventually nationally. And so my name is Yair, and before I introduce Lindsay, who's going to introduce Steph and Jen, I'm just going to tell you that we're working in several organizations, but we're basically a group of parents. This is as grassroots as it gets of an organization who believes in having a dialogue that we need to talk about children, teenagers, adolescents, and the whole smartphones and specifically social media. Because we hear more and more, we see more books about this, and more podcasts, and more data, and more learning, and more research that is basically questioning if this is really the best thing that we can do for our kids. And this grassroots movement, for example, Wait Until 8th, is growing. Some people are taking the pledge, some people are taking different initiatives. And it's really just to increase the dialogue and learn more about this really important topic that is related to all of us who have children and as a society. So I think that this is kind of like the introduction that I wanted to say. The other thing is that whenever we start talking, it's really important for all of us to mention and highlight that this is not like a judgment. We're not basically judging any parents who decide to have a smartphone earlier or social media earlier. Every family does what is right for them and for their children. And the other thing, so this is where we're just having a conversation. And then the other thing that is important is also, we want to make sure that we're not perceived as some sort of an anti-technology cult, because a lot of us are actually interested in AI. We had Aviva last time who actually does a lot of work with AI. I do a lot of work with AI. So I think it's just these are 2 points that are important to mention. So with this, I'm just going to talk or just going to introduce Lindsay. So thank you very much, Lindsay, for joining us. And Lindsay, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Lindsay, based on her training, she's a speech language pathologist. She's been doing this for almost 20 years in Central Bucks area, elementary and middle school. So she's been working with young kids, elementary, middle school age, and also 15 years in private practice. And she's an expert in social cognition, pragmatic language, and speech language disorders. She's also personally a mother of 3, and she strongly advocates delaying smartphone use to protect social, nonverbal, and relationship skills. And as she told you before, she's one of the leaders in Pennsylvania and becoming more of a force in all of the United States, actually. And then one more disclosure that I have is Steph from Virginia is actually my cousin, and so my first cousin. So we're very, very close, and she has 3 kids herself who are amazing, and she's like the most amazing mother I've ever met. So, okay, Lindsay, to you.
Okay. So I'm going to introduce Stephanie Shanholtzer. Stephanie has over 30 years of teaching experience in an elementary setting, and she's currently working as a literacy coach and reading specialist. And we also have Jennifer Ekert joining us. Jennifer has 25 years teaching 7th grade in Lower Merion School District. She holds a doctorate from Harvard in human development and psychology. And both Jen and Stephanie promote waiting and delaying smartphone use, and they're going to talk to us about how they have seen the way children learn change over the course of their teaching. So I guess we can get started. And Stephanie and Jennifer, can you guys tell me just a little bit about your teaching experience and how your experience teaching kids has changed since the introduction of smartphones?
I don't know. I'll
Steph,
let
you start with the younger kids first.
Okay, so yeah. So I'm in elementary school, and I've been elementary school my whole entire 30 years. I actually have seen, a big span of the introduction of technology into the classroom, where, I started where we weren't using any technology to we used a ton of technologies to the end of my career. So the last, I would say 5 years or so is where I saw a big hit in literacy skills, in social and emotional skills, and I see a lot of young kids with cell phones at school. They don't have them in school. We don't allow them in school at all, but they have access to phones. You know, they at the minute they get out of dismissal, they're on their phones. They're gathered in groups looking at phones. So I've seen a huge shift in, like I said, in literacy skills where we have a lot of kids that are reading below grade level, 2 or 3 or 4 years below grade level in the upper grades. And I can't say for sure it's cell phones, but I know for a fact that a lot of the kids who do have these troubles have access to cell phones.
Okay, and then I am spending time with older kids. So I've actually taught in 25 years of middle school, seventh and eighth grade students, English and social studies. I've taught challenge or gifted support to grades 6 to 8. And always in this middle school context. And yes, like Stephanie says, at the early in my career, teachers had no access to technology, which is kind of wild to remember. Back then, there was no technology integrated in our lessons, and now I can't imagine teaching a lesson that didn't at least have like digital directions on the board that were changing to help students keep pace. But from the student end, I guess the screens kind of creeped in. And at our in our school district, we have a off and away policy about cell phones, and I think that the effectiveness of that just largely depends on the building and the principal. So I'm in a building where we're pretty tight on that, and the kids' phones are off and away, but that usually means like in their pocket. Um, and uh, and so ideally, the hours from 8 a.m. until 2:35 are protected, like no cell phone time. But the vast majority of my students are on their phones um, before they get to me. And then as soon as the bell doesn't ring, but as 2:35 approaches, the phones come out and they interact with them again. And and I think that it's impacting most directly for me as a teacher of English. I think it's impacting their their interest in and their aptitude for reading, and especially independent reading, and also just doing difficult things in the classroom. So I'll just say that as a kind of big picture, and maybe we can get into details a little bit more later.
Okay, so you did cover. I was going to ask if there were differences in the off and away and how teachers enforce it. And you said it is by building and by principal. Do do well, I would like to hear more about how you think that the smartphones are influencing their ability to read and their ability to use grit to do challenging work, because I do like
Mhm.
sometimes I feel that the short videos really impact their attention span, and they're getting these quick hits of videos that they enjoy, and then they can just move right on to the next, and that's what they're used to. And then as far as grit, I feel like sitting and watching your phone is the easiest thing that you can do, and you can get the maximum amount of enjoyment out of that. So I guess I just want to hear a little bit more about how you guys feel
Mhm.
that impacts the way students learn.
It's a very passive, it's definitely enjoyable, and it's a passive, disconnected kind of enjoyment. Um, Stephanie, can I answer this one first, and then you'll
Yeah,
kind of look at
absolutely.
yeah, because I think literacy, you'll have a lot to say about young children who are learning to read. I'm
Mhm.
teaching students who hopefully know how to read, and then we're really developing their identity as readers. And um, kids really need to develop a habit for reading, a comfort in aptitude, in identity, before a smartphone competes with their leisure time. So if they get to middle school and I mean, I don't know, a small number of kids, maybe 30% of kids are coming to my seventh grade class and they're independent readers. They like to read. They would tell anyone who asked them that reading was one of their preferred things to do for fun. But if kids haven't developed that and they have a phone, I don't have a lot of optimism that they're going to become readers. And we really need them. There's so many reasons why we want kids to read. There's not enough time in the day for them to do all the reading they need to do. If we want kids, if you think about when they get to the point that they're reading chapter books, at a minimum, you want them reading like a book a month. Like every 4 weeks, they're completing a book that's at their level. And in order to do that, most kids are going to need 20 minutes a day or 2 hours a week. And so what I do in the classroom is try to like set the wheels in motion and help them figure out what kind of books they like and to give them time to read and to get into it and to just do that all kinds of engaging with it. But what I need them to do then is go home and keep reading. And and I think increasingly that is difficult for kids who have smartphones and there aren't real limits on the smartphones. So ideally, if they have a phone, they need to go home and do their reading before they even get to look at their phone because reading a book is just far less interesting. It's really hard to get them to engage with that when their standard is the interactive phone or iPad that is that's just in such little quick bits and it's so passive. Reading a book takes such sustained attention over time and it's so active that that smartphones and screens really interfere with the kids' ability to engage and then develop the skills and be interested at all.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was thinking the whole time as you're speaking, the stamina that kids have for reading a book, they don't have that anymore. I see that a lot. And I don't screen time for since I'm in elementary school, I see a lot. It's not so much phones, but it's screen time in general, whether it's an iPad or computer, Chromebook or whatever. But you think about all the things necessary in order to read. You need, comprehension, you need vocabulary, you need phonemic awareness, you need all of these things are intertwined. And so when let's say if they're on a YouTube video, for example, they're not necessarily getting that rich language. So they're not learning these vocabulary words. They're not hearing in they're not having to use that grit, what you said, or the struggle in order to have to figure out unknown words. So they're not, everything is fed right to them. They don't have to do any of those things in order to watch a video. So, and it's much easier. It's much more enjoyable. So we're what I'm seeing, a lot of kids are they don't have the vocabulary like they had when they're just having to read a book and learning new words and in context
And Stephanie, if
yeah,
can I just add to what you're
yeah, please.
saying? I think it's pushing out reading books, but it's also probably pushing out conversation with whoever they're with. And
Absolutely.
if they were having conversation with an adult caregiver, there would be building of vocabulary and attention.
For sure, for sure. And I was also thinking about this. I have older children. My youngest is going into eighth grade, but I noticed he was at a birthday party last night and he sent a picture that somebody took, and they were at a Chick-fil-A. They were eating out Chick-fil-A, and there were, I think, 10 kids. 5 of them in the picture were staring at their phones. So I was thinking about it, and they're not having that rich conversation, even just learning how to converse on their own, not even with, adults but just kids being kids. They don't know how to converse with each other without looking and staring at a phone.
Stephanie, when you
Yeah.
talk about screen time, can I ask you to define, like, are you talking about kids watching movies? Are you talking about kids watching YouTube shorts? Do you
I,
think there's a
I'm
difference
sorry.
between the two?
Yeah, I see a lot of kids they're so into YouTube or TikTok, even at, the young grades. That's what I'm seeing a lot of. They go home to their iPads and they're on YouTube is a big thing for them, YouTube Shorts.
I wanted to ask Steffi the next question, and this is basically because I want to focus again on what you're both saying about the reading, because I think that it's so important. And I don't think it's only with kids. I mean, when I was a kid, I was growing up, I was the biggest nerd in my whole class, maybe in the whole grade. I was reading books obsessively. I went to visit the library every day. The number of times that I was walking back then, there was no monitoring. You just walked everywhere. So I was walking and fell into a pothole or bumped my head on a tree or whatever is, I can't even tell you. And the point is that even when I was in New York about 15 years ago or so, I always take the train. I love taking the train. Now, of course, I'm afraid of the septic cuts. But regardless, when I was in New York, people sat comfortably and they read books or they read the New York Times or whatever that, they read. They had a span of attention. They could read. And even nowadays, today when I was talking, I was just thinking about it because I was thinking about the webinar. I was in the end of the SEPTA train on the way home from work, and I had to cross all the way to the exit. Pretty much, I would say maybe 25 out of 26 people were on their cell phone, on Reels, on whatever, on Facebook. And the point is that we're gonna host actually in a few months, in the beginning of September. Some of you know Richard Fried, who wrote a lot of books and podcasts. So he's going to come to our show, and he talks about, he's a psychologist, and he talks about persuasive design, which is basically how they put a lot of effort to build all the YouTube and the TikToks in a way that is grabbing our attention, because all these companies, all that they want is our attention. The more we're focused on the screens, that's how they sell ads, that they get more money. So I think that if we as adults stop reading almost because we're so distractible, what chance do the kids have? So I wanted to ask you, do you feel that it's Steffi and also Jen? I mean, the way that I see it is reading a book is an ability to have a span of attention, or like you said, an ability to carry a conversation, as opposed to what your kid just had. Everybody were in the party and just on their cell phones doing the thing. So how do you see this manifesting in reading and other stuff that you see even in behaviors? Do you see the difference now versus kids that you were 10, 20 years ago, and how?
Yeah, I would say 5 years ago even. I see the biggest impacts that I see are behavior, for one, where everything has to be, they don't know how, kids don't know how to self-regulate. So that's something that I'm seeing in the classroom, and not just a few kids, a lot of kids. So self-regulation, I'm seeing limited vocabulary.
Can you
Um,
give examples of what do you mean when, like, your day-to-day life, when you see a lot of kids, what do you mean self-regulation less than before?
more explosive behaviors, not getting things, not, for lack of better terms, not getting their way and having a tantrum, learning how to interact with kids and problem solve. Um, so we're seeing a lot more explosive behaviors. I, Primarily, I've seen it within the last 5 years, where we have kids that are hitting, screaming, throwing things in the classroom, where we have to either remove the child or remove the other children for safety issues. And I'm seeing that exponentially more over the last 5 years. Um, what was the other question? I'm sorry.
In terms of the reading, for example.
Oh, and then for reading, it let's say we had a small group time where one of the centers where they would have to read. for 15 minutes. I would have to stop a group 5, 6, 7 times to bring kids back on track. I didn't have that as much 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Now that's almost non-existent, where I have to have kids sit for 15 minutes and actually read and have the concentration that whole time to actually read and not just stare at the page to make it look like they're reading or they're actually reading. It's really difficult.
So what happens? They like after 2 minutes or so, they just like they start
They'll
looking
get
around.
up, they'll go sharpen a pencil, they'll do something to avoid the work. And it's work at that time to read for them at that young age. They're doing everything and anything to avoid work. So it's whether it's having some kind of behavior where that needs to be addressed, or just getting up and moving around and looking under their seat or playing with something in their desk, those kinds of things.
Attention, issues of related to span of attention. Jen,
Mhm.
any comments or any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think reading and work in general, it's hard to say because changes sort of happen slowly and it all kinds of blends together when I look back. But I am quite sure, and other teachers who have been at it a long time, we will often talk about that we just can't expect as much of kids in the classroom. So the the amount of work and the rigor of the work that I can ask of them isn't what it was 15 years ago or 20 years ago. So their ability to take a lot of notes and then digest information and study for a test by themselves, or to um, to read a novel, have some discussions about it, and go at it, write an essay on their own, and then with like I think most kids were able to do these things. And now it has to be chunked, and the writing of the essay has to take place over 3 days, and it's like a paragraph a day. It's just a lot slower, a lot less. And so in my little bit of homework, I found this very unsurprising statement that as screen time increases, kids' interest in non-digital experiences decreases, and their ability to engage in focused academic activities is diminished. So I think there's there's this obvious connection, and I can see it in my own self. So even as someone who has, I think I lived until I was almost 40 years old before I had a smartphone, and how it affects me, even though I had all these foundational experiences and a lot of school and a lot of reading. But if I have, even as I'm asking my students to read, if I'm trying to read a book and my phone is within arm's length, there's pretty much no chance that I'm getting any reading done. And I don't even have any attention problems. I would identify myself as neurotypical. So when you start adding what might be other challenges that kids have, it's even harder. I had I have a little anecdote about one of my students this year who was one of my most avid readers. She came in and she was into the Warrior Cats, but she was only a fraction of the way through. And there are all these different, each series is like a dozen books. And she like flew through the Warrior Cats in seventh grade. And she just had a voracious appetite for books and was quiet and took it all in, and really extraordinary stamina. And at some point late in the year, she revealed that she doesn't have a phone. She doesn't have a cell phone. And I just thought, that's not surprising. Like
Mhm.
those two things go together. I'm not saying that if she didn't, that every kid who doesn't have a smartphone is going to be a reader like her, but I don't think that would have been possible if the smartphone was competing for her attention. I think that the reading and writing are very effortful and tedious and they require you to think in a big picture and to plug away at something in steps. And then at the very end, ultimately, hopefully you get satisfaction when you finish your book or when you write something that you're proud of. And that's like a really great dopamine hit. But I don't think that dopamine hit is very satisfying if it's competing with all the little dopamine hits that kids are getting from their screens that they're touching.
Which does tie in really nicely with that, with children using their grit to, like you said, accomplish a task and get that feeling of pride and that feeling of accomplishment. And I like this also just makes me think of somewhere I read that just the idea of a child being a creator instead of a consumer just changes their self-confidence and their ability to do hard work and also their motivation. So I guess this kind of leads into my next question is how do you feel like social media is changing the culture of younger children, tweens, and teens? Because I've talked like you, Steph, kind of talked about the children and their behaviors, and I've talked to coworkers about this. I've talked to other parents about this, and just how we don't we do have those kids that just immediately fall into those tantrums and they can't regulate their emotions. And I think that requires like social interaction to learn. I think that just requires a lot of watching parents, so getting that modeling, which they're not doing if they're always looking at a screen, and also um, learning how to cope because so many times kids when they're frustrated, when they're sad, they immediately turn to their screens. So they're not learning how to cope. So I just like I wonder how all these things are changing the culture of childhood and how these kids learn these things.
You're right. The other day, when you're talking, it made me think. The other day, I was at the pool and it was break time. And if you remember when you were little and you had to go get a break, you would find something to do. You had that 15 minutes of break time, and you would find something to do. You would go find a ball. I, I was shocked to see these little kids come out of the pool, pull out their iPads, and sit and watch a video. It's a beautiful day outside, and they're sitting and watching the video. So I think I see that changing the culture. Like they don't know how to keep themselves engaged if they don't if that downtime they don't know what to do. And
They
if
don't
they
know
have
how
a
to board.
smartphone or an iPad or whatever, they've got that immediate boredom filler. They don't have to be creative and try to figure out something else to do during that time.
I
Um,
think,
go ahead. Go ahead.
okay, and then chime in
Yeah.
if you want. Yeah, I think that that's a good example of the screen. Even think about that. They're coming out of the pool dripping wet and they're grabbing a device and I guess have to dry things off before they can touch it, hopefully. But it's really disconnecting from the other people around them and from the environment there.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And they were kids together, but they weren't talking. I mean, they were all
right.
sitting and they were all huddled around it. They actually, I think they even like put a towel over top of the themselves, like as a little tent, just so they could watch the whatever it is they were watching. I have no idea what it was, but uh,
But
that just really struck a chord with me.
they're unable to figure out how to amuse themselves
Hmm.
alone in that place or with any or to engage anyone to amuse themselves to pleasantly pass 15 minutes.
Right.
Hmm.
Well,
And
I
so,
think that
oh, go ahead.
no, I was saying, I think that I really connected to what you said, Jen, that if you're about to read a book before and your cell phone is, even close by, it's harder to read the book and most likely you're going to be distracted by the phone. And I can say myself that sometimes, and I'm an adult, I'm trying to think about my maybe mature brain versus the children who are, they're much more prone to this. But when I sit at home or like I'm tired and should I read? And then I pick up the phone and my YouTube is the reels on Facebook, and I'm like, yeah, just one. And then before I know it, it's like dong, 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 another one, boom. An hour is gone, and my wife is asleep, and we're like, and so if I don't have a chance, and it's so addictive, what chance do the kids have? Like Steffi was saying, they're running outside from the pool before they're still wet, zapping themselves on the. So yeah, I think that I totally relate to what you said. My next question is actually to Lindsay, and you're not a teacher, but you're an educator because you're a speech pathologist, and you're of course a mother, but you're also your expertise is, I don't exactly know what that means. Maybe you can describe what social cognition is, but you've been doing this, the speech therapy or the speech language pathologies for almost 2 decades, for almost 20 years. So maybe I'd love to hear what your experience personally is in terms of, have you seen the difference now, the last 5 years or 10 years versus 10 or 15 years ago? And what changes do you see? Like, what is your experience? Maybe a few examples.
Sure. So social cognition is our ability to take the perspective of another person. It's our ability to kind of read the room and figure out how to act in different social situations. Um, it's that social part of our brain that's telling us how to act, what other people need. And then there's also pragmatic language, and that's the language that we use to communicate socially with other people. We also, it's such a wide range of skills that we treat because we work on vocabulary, we work on grammar and syntax, speech sounds, so that's articulation, and then again, just comprehension and using language as a whole to communicate. So I do see a big difference. I actually went back. I started working in 2008. So that's right when the iPhone came out. So I feel like I see the progression. Like the early kids that I started working with didn't really have experience with iPhones and iPads, and then all the way to now. I am only in an elementary setting now, so I don't see the middle school kids. But I see so many more kids coming in through early intervention. The amount of evaluations that I did went from like 5 when I first started working in 2008, 2009. Now I do over 20 in a school year. So I think I think when kids are on screens, they're not practicing language, they're not using language. I think they're not interacting socially with peers. So Jonathan Haidt talked about attunement in his book, and this really pairs up with engagement, which is one of the first things that I look at when a kid comes into my practice, that who needs help with social skills. So it's just, are they connected with the other person in the room? Are they doing things together with the other person in the room and not parallel? So it does. So I do see it in impacting the way that kids are developing language and social skills. I feel like more kids need that support from me. Steph, like you described, I see a lot more kids in our younger grades who just come in with that dysregulated ability to cope when they're frustrated, when they're sad, and we work a lot on behaviors in the younger grades. And I think moving forward, I just again have concerns with the way that phones will impact my kids socially when they're older. So I'm not sure it did, and I think that answered your question.
It did, and
Yeah.
it sounds like
Yeah.
you're all aligned with what everybody else is saying.
Yeah, I feel like I have so much to say about this that I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Maybe we'll get back to it. But in the meantime, I want to ask a question from the audience, a question to Steph and to Jen. So this is a question of Connor. So it's more of a practical question. He's trying to raise his children with kind of slow tech to build up and enjoy life and the experiences. But what he says is that all schools around him, all the kids have iPads and Chromebooks and K-12, and and he's really trying, but after kindergarten, he's kind of throwing this all out of the window. So I think, and he's asking more, but the question that I have to both of you is, what is your experience? Because there's the smartphones, the social media, but yet a separate issue is we see more and more technology. Like in my school, we start having iPads in first grade and then laptops in second grade and on. What are your thoughts about the technology, not in the computer labs, but just like as a regular part of the curriculum? So maybe Steph, you can start in terms of your
Yeah.
elementary experience.
Yeah, we start same thing. We kindergarten has iPads. They don't use them as much. I would say there's probably about in the day, there's probably about 40 minutes of the day is spent on an iPad, maybe 20 minutes during reading and 20 minutes during math, maybe not quite that long. But I do see I see it as it's twofold. I see technology being a great enhancement of the things that we're doing in the classroom. I use technology a lot. The kids do enjoy it, so it does grab their attention. But it can be overused. I see it happening a lot, especially with some of the younger teachers that are using technology almost to pacify their kids sometimes, where, so they can work with a smaller group. They're just going to give them either something to read on the iPads or their Chromebooks, or they're going to play a game, an educational game. So I see it happening more um, with some younger teachers. So I see it beneficial, but I can also see it as a detriment as well. I mean, it is the way of I mean, it is where we are going as a society. We are much more technological, and so we do have to learn how to integrate it responsibly, especially with younger kids. But I can see it and I see it in both ways. I see it being beneficial, but I can see it harming as well if it's used too often.
Yeah, I would say I appreciate this question. I really sympathize with the parent. My kids are 18 and 20, and I don't envy being a parent of kids growing up with so much technology in school, to be honest. So I think one piece of advice I have as to a parent is um, don't be afraid to ask genuine questions about how technology is being used, how much of it, and why. And to know, because it's possible, depending on if you have a kid in middle school and they're going from teacher to teacher, it's possible that they could come home having had 5 hours on the computer. And that's probably not good in any case, even if each hour was justified. I think it's also reasonable. We have some families who specifically request that the Chromebook that they have through seventh grade does not come home with them. And that is a perfectly reasonable request because once it's in your house, then that's much harder to control. And even though there's just they can be endlessly amused on it, and you haven't even provided that, so you can ask that. I would say that as an English teacher, I am I tend to be skeptical of using technology in my classroom. I don't have a lot of time with students. I have 45 minutes to teach reading and writing. And I find we have a few probably very expensive applications. One of them is for reading comprehension. I use it when I'm absent. My kids tell me they really don't like it. It's multiple choice questions. I would rather teach them to very actively engage and be able to mark up on paper. When they're doing work on the computer, I don't know what else they're doing and I can't see all of their screens. And they will confess to me that they're often getting distracted. And their writing, it's becoming kind of common. It's been for years that kids would plagiarize things from somewhere on the internet, and I would be able to figure that out, and then I would find that exact passage. But what I'm finding now is kids are also generating text that's not their own using AI. And so I'm going to be more increasingly old school that they're generating their writing in a draft form by hand, and they can type it if they want to. And by the way, one challenge with this is that kids' handwriting overall has deteriorated. Um,
If I could interject here, the handwriting is a big issue with reading development. I mean, we've learned that handwriting goes hand in hand with learning how to read. That's a really important step. It trains our brain, you know. And I was just thinking as you were talking, my middle schooler, I don't think he has ever written out an essay or paragraph. And if he had to actually write it out, it would be so hard to read because he doesn't ever have to do it. So I think that's a really great idea is having them write it on paper. We do have, you know, in the younger grades, kids are writing, but as they get older in fourth and fifth grades, I see them, most of their stuff is online. They're stored in a Google
Mhm.
Drive. And I mean, I see benefits to that, but I also, again, there's a lot of things that are not good with that.
I hope we did okay with that question. And I would just say still know as parents, especially if you can come together with other parents, that you still have a lot of power about what is happening in your own home, even if what's happening at school isn't ideal from your point of view.
Actually, it goes to the second part of the question of Connor, and he's more specific about, from your experience, the two of you, do you think or do you feel that the teachers would support if he, for example, would ask not to use the technology, the screens, the laptops, etc., and just to use them for learning technology skills? Because we don't really know, like, is it okay to ask the questions and what are you doing? And can we limit it only for learning skills or apps?
I think it's a
Absolutely.
good idea to go in and they probably are a few things that they're going to be using. Like for example, in math, our students are using IXL. So Connor would probably the he could ask for time with the math teacher and can you show me what this looks like and just make the case that it's helping my kid learn math and so that he understands what that looks like. Because I think that technology is often used in support of some kind of content, but we're not transparent with parents about what that looks like or how it's working. So I think it's really reasonable to ask teachers at the beginning of the year what what their kid is going to be using and can they preview it? Can they look at it with the teacher?
And I think a lot of the programs that I use were adaptive. So they grew with the student. So they're, you know, I think I Excel is the same way.
Yes.
It grows with the student. So yeah, but asking to see it and asking the purpose is, I think, 100% beneficial and acceptable.
Mhm.
Um, there are a lot of questions about technology and how it is used in the classroom here, and I'm just looking at a few of them. I mean, I think Abby is asking, can you speak to how a healthy screens or tech diet looks? So maybe, and maybe you guys did touch on this a little bit, like how would you support using screens in the classroom and maybe how would you discourage using screens in the classroom as an
So she's
educator?
asking about a healthy screen diet in the classroom or at home.
She didn't specify.
I think it's always whether as a teacher, I think I'm always thinking about why am I doing this? What do I want my kids to learn? And then I would look at the technology and think, okay, how much is this helping me? So um, we're using these this one reading comprehension program called Common Lit, and we now use that for an assessment beginning, middle, and end of the year. So I guess it's somewhat valuable for assessment, although to be honest, it's not very closely aligned with our instruction. Um, and then there there's something else that is promoted. It's called, oh, it's a grammar program. I'm forgetting the exact title right now, but it is adaptive. But what happens is that if a kid gets something wrong, they have to get three right next, and until they get three right, if they don't progress, and so they kind of go down like this circle of doom. And I learned that after I had assigned it and asked kids to do it at home, and they were so frustrated. So I now only use that if I'm in the classroom and I can like bounce around and help kids so that their hands go up as they're getting into that circle of doom. So I don't know that I'm answering this well, but I think, and this is just from an English teacher point of view, that I think as someone who's been teaching a long time, I'm always thinking about why am I doing this? And is this tool really helping? I'm not sure that young teachers always have that mindset for various reasons. And that's
I
just, yeah, go ahead, Steph.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I do see value. I do see value in using technology. I used it in my classroom, um, but I think it's going to depend on in each classroom how much it's being used. Nothing is going to replace a human teacher, and nothing's going to replace human feedback. So I think that it does have a place in the classroom because of what, because of how what technology is has brought to our society. But I feel like it has to be really capped. I think the majority of the teaching should come from the teacher and the students together. Um, and I think a small majority is a small amount of the time can be used in a good way using technology, but I think it just really has to be regulated.
I agree with what you were saying. I use technology at home with my kids. We're trying to, or they are, as you know, Steph, they're bilingual. And some of the things that we do in terms of reading and writing, I started using supervised Duolingo, which I think is an effective tool. So where was it? I have a couple of questions. First of all, my question, and also a second question is a question of Megan. So you were talking a lot about writing. And my question to you, how important is really handwriting? Do we really need it? Or maybe it's part of an evolution that, I mean, I can tell you that when I'm in the hospital and I rarely take notes, but if I take notes, I'm looking at this. This is kind of how it looks like. Like, what did I just, I have no idea because not only that I don't write, I barely, at this point, I even barely type. I just dictate things. I just talk to myself and blah, 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 and it's, and I see all this. I dictate. So it's really, maybe it's part of an evolution, and writing like this, cursive or non-cursive, is it really that important in your opinion as educators? And then the second question that is separate, so that was the first question about the writing. The second one of Megan is more, she was very grateful to this conversation, but she wants to know, everybody is, or all the kids it could be very difficult for them, smartphones and social media. But do you feel that there are specific needs? You mentioned, Jen, that you're neurotypical, but do you see that there's even more difficult for neurodivergent kids or parents? So these are the two separate questions that I had to both of you: the writing and the neurodivergent children.
So handwriting, I'm going to say, speaking with elementary school and just and young learners, young readers, handwriting is really important. Formation of letters, forming the letter so you understand this letter correlates with this letter name, the sound. It's important to have that, both that tactile and um uh,
Visual.
that yeah,
And
visual cues. Thank you. I couldn't think of the
Yeah.
word. Thank you. So it's really important in young learners, young readers, the handwriting. Now, I'm not going to say cursive over manuscript. I don't know if that is so much more crucial, but definitely learning to print manuscript is really important for those early readers. I can't speak to the middle schoolers, but I know it's important when you're learning to read
So
the
I
handwriting.
I would add to that a little anecdote. My son graduated high school. We went out to dinner with his grandma, and he opened up the card, and he and his friend could not read any of it. They could kind of guess that it said Dear Charlie, but it was written in cursive, and they could not read cursive because they can't write cursive. Um, so they also have no signatures. But aside from that, um, I think that like when I'm taking notes, like this is like I'm taking notes today. I prepared a little bit, I'm jotting things down, and I know where things are on the page, and it's helping me think through my ideas and kind of categorize things. If I were this is helping me like prepare for a process and then talk about later this conversation. And 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 I think that this kind of experience by hand is really valuable. I want to be able to have a class of 20 kids and say, okay, here's a question. I want you all to write about this for 7 minutes, and then we're going to talk. I want them to be able to open up a notebook and fill half a page with thoughts, um, which is hard for many people to do. And then I think it corresponds to something with reading. So reading a paper book is different than reading a digital form of a book. If you think about it, if there's like something that really caught your attention in a book, you'll probably remember where it was on the page, left side, right side, top, bottom. And that kind of like visual experience helps us connect with what we're taking in or what we're creating. So I think probably it used to be that a tiny number of kids had illegible handwriting. Now in middle school, it's probably like a good 20% of kids I'm pretty good and I can barely read their handwriting. So I think this is a way that schools are not doing well. I can tell you that with my own son he doesn't form his letters correctly. He writes like chicken scrawl. Um, I asked about this every year of elementary school, and I was always told not to worry about it.
There's a correlation where you'll see kids with who when they're forming their letters, they're going from bottom to top. Those kids, 9 times out of 10, are going to have some kind of reading difficulties because we read top to bottom, we read left to right in English. And if we're forming our letters backwards, basically, I mean, everything should be top down.
Mhm.
That creates confusion in your brain. So there's a big correlation between handwriting and reading success.
Perfect. And the second part of the question was the neurodivergent and social media.
Oh,
So maybe Jenna.
I I brought that up because I have a daughter who is neurodivergent, and she was very late identified autistic at age 16 and a half after 4 years of being misdiagnosed by a lot of well-paid, very well-credentialed people who told us that she had ADHD and anxiety, and they really missed autism. In any case, my daughter would tell you that screens are even harder for someone whose brain works differently like this because transitions are hard for her. It's really hard for her to switch from one activity to another, like to get going, or to stop doing something that she's enjoying. And that's everyone's experience on a phone, but it almost feels to me like it, in retrospect, I wish we had delayed it longer for her and put more guardrails on because it honestly feels like it was almost cruel to give it to her with so much access. She's trying to figure out now, she's about to turn 21. She's trying to figure out if she could live with just a flip phone because she doesn't want to have to try to regulate her attention around a smartphone. So she's super self-aware about it. But the way that she explained it to me is that in college, in order for her to have any chance of being productive with her schoolwork, she needs to be, she needs to have good sleep, good nutrition, time outside, exercise, and very little screen time. It's like the combination of all of those things. And if any of those are off, um, it's really hard for her to be productive.
She sounds wise beyond her years. I'm so
Absolutely.
impressed. Yeah. I have a question from Lauren. She's asking, do you find differences in parenting as compared to years past? She said, I often don't know if I'm in the minority when I'm more mindful of technology as compared to other parents.
Mm.
So do you see that and do you feel like it impacts the children?
We're not hearing that much from parents about this, I would say, to be honest. I would welcome it. And I think that's partly why this kind of group of Wait Till Eighth is so important to make connections with other parents and feel like you're not the only one. So I can't say that I'm hearing more or seeing anything different with parenting. I think parents are sort of a cultural shift. To some extent, they're more defensive of, protective of their kids and trying to remove obstacles in their path or things that make their kids uncomfortable. I see more of that. Um, and yeah, I'll stop there.
What
Yeah.
about you?
I want to say exactly the same thing. The parenting part, I do see where um, parents will come in for a conference and we'll talk about they don't know how to limit their kids' screen time, and they don't know how to. It's more so, again, more so screen time for my school age. They're frustrated with it, but they don't know how to take them off. So I'm seeing again also the same thing what you just said, where I feel parents are a little bit more defensive of their actions, and or not wanting to blame their child for doing something, but they want to blame
Mhm.
what they see on the outside.
So I
Um,
have a question about this, Steffi, to all three of you actually, is because you started and you said, so I'm seeing so far, based on all that you said, there's definitely a difference in the children and behaviors and tantrums and attention span in the last 5 years or so. But how do we know necessarily that this is truly related to screens or smartphones directly of the children? Like, for example, Steffi, you said that, in your case, it's not, they don't have smartphones yet often, but they use YouTube and stuff, but maybe it's the parents and the environment. I can tell you that, when I moved to Philadelphia, I really tried to push and delay the smartphone. I was afraid of it, that I'll be addicted because I have an addicted nature. And indeed, when I got it, I had to get it for work and I got it and social media and this and that. And it's hard because I find myself, not only me, but when I'm in the park, pushing and looking at the kids, I find myself like, okay, they're good. I'm gonna rest, and I'm gonna be on my cell phone and just check things, check emails, whatever, and let them play on the swings. And I look around, and many of the adults do the same. It's not the same engagement that we saw 15 years ago. And plus, you're also saying that the parents are more, I don't know if it's related to that, or more protective. And we have to fill the time of the kids of sending them every day to, dance class, to yoga class, to whatever. Do. So could it be actually that the behaviors that you're observing of the children is related to us, the adults, of what we
Yes.
see that we're not present when we're at home? I try to minimize it, but I find myself, I could be enjoying my kids. What greater thing is to have a conversation with a 7 and a 5 years old or read them a book? But I'm like, oh, let me just do this. Let me just do this. And so anyway, it's kind of an abstract question, but I wanted to see if any of you have any comments about this. How do we know
Um,
that it's the children? How do we know that it's
I
the
think yeah, it's as adults, it's so easy and so much more comfortable to point fingers at the children. And really, a lot, our behavior as the adults in the room is not any better or different. And they don't have someone to connect with if we're on our devices. And they're paying attention so much to what we're modeling, a lot more than to what we're saying. So I think parents really paying attention to their own screen use when they're when they're visible to their kids, and how accessible where their attention is really important.
Yeah, I do agree. And I think you brought up a lot of good points, Yair. I think, I mean, I've always tried to be mindful of using my phone with my kids just because of my background. And I know that interaction is so important for their development. But I tell my friends, like the one thing I've tried to do is maybe just like not take as many pictures. And I feel like they've noticed that. Like I've tried to change one thing about the way I use my smartphone and what I'm modeling for my kids. I do also think, like you guys said, like removing obstacles, and I, and I also try to be mindful about letting my kids be bored. And when they come to me and they say they're bored, letting them figure out what to do instead of immediately trying to help them figure out what to do. And there are a lot of tears in my house, and there's a lot of screaming, and there are tantrums, but that's okay because like they get through that and then they figure out what to do, and it's better than anything I could have ever helped them do. And then I've even been trying to manage my kids' expectations because I feel like we give and we give and we give and we want to make everything so special and so great. And I just want them to be okay with the mundane and not having everything like every birthday party be so like spectacular, every theme day be so spectacular, and it's been interesting. Like with camp, they have a theme day every Wednesday, and I've been letting them figure it out this year. So I haven't been like it's been Wacky Wednesday, and I haven't been picking out their outfits for them, and I've been letting them come up with it, and I think it's good for their creativity and their confidence. And so many other things. So I have, yes, I think all of those things together impact the way our kids behave and the way our kids learn. But I do think
Absolutely.
screens are a big part of it.
I think it's everything that you said all combined into one. I mean, it's not one factor. It's not just the kids are on cell phones, and there's a whole amalgamation of there's so much into it, what's impacting the kids. So for sure, I think parents being role models for their kids, we're all guilty. We're not pointing fingers that it's, you're doing something bad. We just have to be more cognizant of what we're doing.
This is fascinating. I'm gonna ask a question of P. Fletcher, and just a comment before that of Loretta. Loretta says that for her opinion, at eighth grade, the brains are still very much in development and still at a very high risk of an addiction, much more so than adults. So she says that wait until eighth is a catchy slogan, but it's not a deal. And from her perspective, it should be delay the smartphone use. And actually, she's right. And there's more and more organizations like Lindsay and I are part of an organization called Smartphones Free Childhood, United States, and there's different chapters in different states, and there's Screen Strong, so there's different type of organizations. But I agree with you. And now to the question of Pete Fletcher, which is, do you think that the schools overall will be moving off of all screens, kind of like what the model is happening in Sweden and Finland and Scandinavia? And I will expand on that question. And by the way, we're aware that it's 9:03. We're going to hard stop at 9:10 for respect of everybody, but there's a lot of questions. So the expanded question is, do you really think it makes a difference? Because some of the schools, like you mentioned at the beginning, they mandate that you have to put the kid's smartphone in a little baggie and you're not allowed to touch it until the end of the school, like nothing. But does it really make a difference if they can, at home, they can be immediately on the YouTubes and afterwards, if it makes a big difference? So again, the question of P. Fletcher is, do you think the model of the schools here is going to be migrating away from screens altogether?
I don't think I don't think we're moving in that direction because, at least in my experience, the district loves doing assessments that are all using technology. So, technology assessments in various skill areas, all using technology multiple times a year. Would other teachers agree?
Yeah, most
At
of
a
our
minimum.
Yeah, most of our assessments are online and digitally. Although in my district, because of budget cuts, we have taken away one-to-one in my district in elementary schools because they just don't have enough money to replace them. So they're still going to be used. I mean, that's like I said, every one of our assessments is our state assessment is it's digital. So I think it's not going to go away, but I think in some cases in my district alone is it's going to be lessened because they just don't have the tools
Mhm.
because of budgets.
In
Um,
terms of the other, oh, sorry, Lindsay.
it's okay. Go ahead.
In terms of the other question, um, I I think there's definitely value to schools taking the phones and really having 100% screen-free school days. So if you send your kid to Lower Merion School District, where my son just graduated, apparently in the high school, he tells me he and all of the other students, I don't know if that's true, but he is on his phone like all the time. And this makes me sad and upset. So I really wish that the adults would be the adults and not let my son be on this phone so he'd actually be talking to his teachers and his classmates. But you can, if you send your kid to Friend Central and pay upwards of $40,000 a year, they're now going to screen free. So no cell phones there. And that doesn't seem right to me. And in Vermont, I'm in Vermont on vacation right now. Um, in next September, there are going to be no phones in schools for kids.
Vermont's doing a lot, a lot. One of the women from Smartphone Free Childhood is based there, and she shares a lot of information. And they, yes, I think a lot is happening in Vermont. I would love to see a bell to bell policy. I and like you mentioned, it's that. I mean, it's important for them to be away during instructional time because it is a distraction, but also non-instructional time where kids have the opportunity to have that social interaction. I think is so important and not be lost in their phones. I have one last question for you guys. I guess if you wanted to leave parents with one piece of information that if you were able to just give parents one message, what would it be?
Oh, there's so many things.
I think,
Um, Go ahead.
yeah, you can think as I
Yeah.
share. As a parent, I just feel like your kids are young for such a small amount of time. It's so cliche, but it goes so fast. But just have all of the experiences, as much as they're difficult, they're difficult in their own special ways that you love them for, and just connect with them and like lean into any kinds of real connections and experiences that you can share. Read to them, read with them, read alongside of them, and just uh, yeah, know what you value in your own family and in your own home, and then set real guardrails so that screens are not interfering with that.
That my first thought, the very first thought that came to my mind was just read with two and your kids, talk about books with them, talk, have time at the table where no one has anything and talk. Um, having That's a big thing. You can tell at school which kids are not talked to or talk to adults at home. So my biggest message is like what you said, enjoy this time as kids because it does go by so fast. Keep them as innocent as long as you can, but teach all the while it's not going away. Technology, and it's not a bad thing, but teaching your kids how to learn how to regulate themselves and deal with the addictive nature of cell phones and any kind of media, um, but talking with them is the biggest thing.
Reading and talking. This is great. Jen, when you were talking about this example, and I'm going to finish here, you were talking about the example of the girl that you had in class who was able to read unbelievable amounts of books, and 12 books and another series, and so she reading so much, and then you discovered that it's possibly, or at least it's correlating with the fact that she doesn't have a smartphone. So what Lindsay and I and more people across the United States are trying to do is to make this reality a true possibility. Because what can happen, and many of you heard this story, is that my sister was a clinical psychologist, and she does not like smartphones and kids, and she was trying to convince kids. But when her child was third grade, despite everything she did, her daughter was the last one without a smartphone in third grade. So she had to. So even though she loves to read, the daughter likes her daughter. Once everybody else is on the smartphone and on YouTube and whatever, TikTok and all of that, it's kind of it's a difficult war to win. And that's why we're trying to spread the message, not to judge people with a smartphone, but to allow us to have enough children, enough parents that feel comfortable raising their kids. And I think Loretta said it, while delaying, and let them be children. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, what we're doing. And with that, I wanted to thank all of you. Lindsay, thank you for helping you moderate and for your very important insights. And Jen and Steph for sharing this amazing conversation. This conversation will also be available in a recording, and I'll share it in the groups, and you're welcome to watch it and to share it. So thank you very, very much. And thank you everybody all the participants who joined us, and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.